We are live. Hello, welcome to today's weekly Animatron webinar. I'm your personal Animatron guru, Bryce. I will be guiding you through today's topic of interest, which we have selected from the overwhelming need to show you guys a little bit more about animation specifically. A couple of people are having some interesting or suggesting some questions about animation looping. So that's what we decided to go with this week for our topic. So we'll be discussing animation looping and looping animations. And yes, there is a difference between the two of them. And I'll get to that when we go through our live demo together. For those of you guys who are brand new to Animatron and this is your first experience walking through our Animatron Editor, I will suggest that you click on the description area below our viewer window here. And there's a little button there. It says Show Me More. You should be able to expand the description area, and there's a hyperlink inside of that. So for you guys who are brand new, click on that hyperlink and it will take you to our YouTube playlist of basically every official Animatron tutorial that we've created thus far. And it's in more or less of a sequence. So if you guys are willing to go through that, each video is a little under 3 minutes. So take your time and discover a bit more about the tools and functions and the panel layouts. Excuse me, the user interface and all that fun little information, terminology and whatnot. So click on that, get yourself familiarized. For today, we will be discussing our animation looping. So I ask that if you guys are going to ask me any questions throughout our demo, that you keep on topic or keep topic related questions. You can ask your topic related questions as we're going through the demo. I'll try to answer those as accurately as possible. And keep your off-topic questions, maybe something that's a bit more specific to your own projects or your own questions that you might have that don't have anything to relate with looping animations. I ask that you hold off until the end of the demo when we have our Q&A session. Otherwise, that's about it for my introduction speech here. So we can just get right to it. So let me share my screen with you here. And we should see our Animatron Editor. So I already have my editor window open. I've created a brand new project. If you guys are unfamiliar with our menus, just create a new project. You can click on our main menu up here at the top left. It's this little orange or blue button. You go to project and you can just go to new project. Or if you have a project that you've recently created, you can just go to open project and choose from whatever you already have in your library. So we're going to go over looping animations. I have something here from that I've already scraped from our marketplace. I'm going to cover that in a little bit. But for you guys who are really interested in frame by frame animations or sequential animations, and what I mean by that is you have a series of images that happen one after another. I can show you a little bit more information on how to get those, first of all, how to bring those into the editor itself, as well as grouping them together so that you can loop the entire animation over and over again. So this is really good for you guys who have, some pre-made PNG images that are in sequence, or just have a series of images from a high-speed camera. You can do that as well. And then we'll cover our frames per second and whatnot. So what I'm going to do is click on my main menu here. I want to bring some images in for my sequence. So I'll click on my main menu. I'll go to import. And you see image, SVG, audio, and font. What we want is a series of images or a sequence of images. And you can see here under our formats, requested formats are JPEG and PNG. Optimally, you'll choose some PNG images. For the export purposes, it's nice to have PNG because there's some transparency to them. So what I'm going to do is select a series of files here. Actually, I have my folder open already. So what I'm going to do is bring my folder into view. Go to the folder that I already have my image sequence in, and open my folder. And you see I have a number of images here. And as I show you this in the folder, it's a good little thing to take note of. Let me change this over. Oops, sorry. Let's change this to details. Okay, so this is basically the order that Animatron is going to be viewing it in, or how Animatron will be bringing them into your layers. David, the screen resolution, you may be able to change that under your current screen settings. If not, I think it automatically appends to 720. So you may just have to deal with some slight degradation in the video. Sorry about that. I'll go back to my image sequences here. So what I wanted to cover with my image sequence is that you are going to be following a particular naming convention. For one, they need to be in series or in sequence. So if you look at my image titles here, I have image underscore sequence underscore test underscore 01. Just for an easy way of bringing these images in, how the editor is going to be viewing them, how they're brought in. It's nice not to have any spaces in there. Given any sort of export or import, you usually want to have these underscores in here for programming or coding needs. But I just do it as a matter of habit. So what you'll see is each image has a numeric extension on the end of it. We call these frame buffers. So you'll see that it's 01, 02, 03, and I have, I believe, 25 images in all. So you go down to the very last one, and you're basically selecting all of these and dropping them into our import window. But I'd like to show you how these images look in series. So we'll start from the top left and go to the bottom right. And if you read from top to bottom, left to right, you'll see this little impact sequence. It's like a test impact from start to finish within 25 frames. So what I can do is click my very first image and then shift select to my very last one. And I'll just click and drag into my drag and drop file area here in the Animatron Editor. And you'll see it'll load each one of these images up in sequence. And after it's done loading all of the images, we're greeted with this little window that allows us to place them in series. So this is really good for you guys who already have those image sequences dictated for you. Create image sequence from selected files. And what you should know about Animatron's timeline is that it is based on seconds or numeric value. So it's fractions of a second. You can see here on my timeline as I scrub through it. It's not by frames. So a lot of animators out there are used to using frame by frame. Generally 24 frames per second is what you would expect. So if you were to break down 24 frames per second, the actual sorry, give me a second here. The actual numeric fraction of 24 frames per second per image, so one frame of those 24 frames, is 0.041. It does look like a very awkward number to be typing in, but for you guys who are used to that 24 frames per second animation rate, so any of you game animators out there, anybody who is putting in a series of images together that have captured it from regular camera, 24 frames per second is your standard. and this is your numeric fraction that you should be entering. So each frame, right, per image will last, as it's played through, for 0.041 seconds. And it will, you'll see here, once I create the image sequence, and I'll just click on create and let it do its thing. And what's going to happen is you'll see them all dropped in. Under our layers panel at the bottom left, it has dropped in a new layer, and you'll see all of the keyframes appended to that layer. And what I can do is zoom my timeline in just by clicking on our little zoom in handle at the bottom here. And you'll see each one is placed at its own keyframe. You'll see these little little gray diamonds. So I can literally just scrub through my timeline and see how it's placed each one of those numeric images back to back and plays in sequence. So in 24 frames per second, if I hit enter, that's how fast the image sequence, and that's 25 frames. I've had 25 frames, but I spaced them out to cover over 24 frames per second. So if you'll see here, it dropped them all in one layer. The layer itself is a combined layer, and we can see this by the little gray triangle to the left of our layer thumbnail. If you hover over it, it'll say show nested layers. So this is a great way, if you click on this, great way to see how the image sequence actually applied each image. So you'll see here in sequence, image sequence test 1, test 2, test 3. And it's laid out in my layers, and I'll just drag my layers up here so you can see all of them in sequence. So our uppermost layer, our combined layer itself, contains all of these keyframes where those images have been placed. And if you want to change them independently, all you have to do is click on that little gray triangle to the left of our combined layer. You'll see they're laid back to back. And I'll bring my canvas here so we can scrub through and get a better idea of what's going on. So as I scrub through, you'll see it changes to the next image and the next image and the next image. So this is, this is our image sequence as it's applied to the Animatron Editor timeline, how it's laid out in our layers. So you can always edit this at any time. You can grab an image and drag it along. If not, I just want to reset it here. If not, the quickest way to bring the sequence back into the speed that you want it to play at is to actually re-import most of these, because the way they're laid out on the timeline at this moment, the current version of our editor doesn't allow for an optimal rescaling of these, basically the speed at which the sequence is playing. But one thing that you can do is, you'll see here at the very end, my image sequence test 25, right? The last frame that I brought in of my sequence. What you can do is see how long this is played out for, and we're just going to end this at 1 second. So what I'll do is hide all those individual layers and work just with my combined layer. I'm zoomed in as far as I can possibly get at the moment. And what you can do is add your end action. So what I'm going to do is right click at the exact 1 second marker. Right click on the time band of layer 1, which is our image sequence, and change end action. And I'm just going to stop this image sequence at the 1 second mark. So it will not show past that 1 second mark, but it will play through for 1 second. And what this allows me to do is it shows me the end of the time band. You'll see this little blue handle show up at the end with the 2 vertical lines on it. And this means that we can actually scale the pace or the rate at which this image sequence is played. If you want to scale the entire animation, you can hold down the shift button and drag the entire timeline to where you want it to go. So one thing you should take note of is because of the scale of our current timeline, we're as zoomed into the timeline as we possibly should be. You'll notice sometimes that a few of the keyframes might disappear. You'll see right here, just above 0.8, one of the keyframes disappeared. It doesn't mean that the image itself has disappeared. It's just placing that image at a particular fraction or time fraction that Animatron can't actually show you yet. So don't let that worry you. It's actually in there. But what we can do is bring this up to 2 seconds. So again, I'm just holding down Shift, and I left-clicked on the end of our time band, that little handle at the end, the blue handle. And as I'm holding down left-click, I can drag it and scale it to 2 seconds. And then I'll just let go of that left-click, and it has now spaced it out for 2 seconds. So this is a great way to change the pace at which your image sequences are playing. Let me just change my end time sequence here so it doesn't play past it. For you guys out there who like to view all of the looping animations or the animations that you're working with currently, it's a good habit to get into just changing the scene duration. And the scene duration is this little gray flag here at the very end. You see a red line at the end of the timeline. So you can click and drag this scene duration handle to whatever timestamp you need it to be at. And this is a great way to play back your images or play back your animations really quickly. So I can just hit enter and it'll stop at that 2 second mark. And that's basically why I changed it to 2 seconds. So I hit enter, play, and it'll stop there. Or you can go up to our scenes. There's another thing about scene duration. There's a little, it's quite difficult to pick out if you weren't really looking for it, but there's this little handle at the very top right of our scene panel. When you hover over it, it says click to expand, or you can just hit Alt-4 to expand it automatically, or with our hotkey. So you can click on that and you'll get a little bit more information about each scene. Since I'm only working with one scene, it's named Scene 1. And the number or the numeric indicator right here is how many seconds the scene lasts for, which is essentially exactly what our scene duration handle is doing. So what I can do just to show you how this works is I'll just type in 2.25 or 2.5, 2.5, hit enter, and you'll see my scene duration flag has now moved over to 2.5 seconds. So if you want to be a bit more accurate about how long your scenes last for, we can change this back to 2 seconds, and this will give us a good marker or an endpoint so that we can keep testing our animation and not have the timeline play through too many times without us knowing what's going on. So now that I have that, I've showed you scaling our combine layer, and this is our image sequence. What you can do, if you notice our image sequence jumps around a bit, is because the way the images were clipped, each individual image was not centered for this red oval to append here. So it's good that we have a black background because we can kind of match that with our background and make it kind of seamless. So let me get this better into view. So we have these white borders here. If we wanted to have that extra space and just show or not have that difference in background color, I'll just go up to my my project information at the top here, and I'll go down to background and click on the color thumbnail next to background. Just left click on it, and it'll bring up your color palette or your color picker. And you can choose a color that matches. So if you choose black, obviously it's not a perfect black, but we do have our eyedropper tool, which you can scan the canvas surface and choose the exact color that you want. So I actually chose the color from the image sequences that we used. So that's now our background color. It's a good little hint for you guys that are trying to keep consistent with your animations. So now that we have everything matching up, we actually want to recenter where all of the red ovals are so it doesn't look real shaky when you play through it. So this is another good reason for having these laid out in individual layers underneath the combine layer. So what I can do is just set a central point. A good habit to get into for this particular event is selecting the pivot point of the image itself. So I'll just as a level of security or level of safety. It's a good habit to go over or switch over to design mode. I'm not animating anything right now. It's already animated in sequence. So when you switch over to design mode, it doesn't add any unintended keyframes to our timeline. If it was in animation mode and you tried to change where the center of, where our pivot point was, it would try to add that keyframe to your timeline wherever you currently were on the timeline with the playhead. So in order to avoid that, I switched everything over to design mode and just click on it up here at the top of our editor. And now what we can do is click on this little central point here. This is our pivot point, and it's indicated by the black circle. You hover over it and it gets a little bit bigger, so it shows you can interact with it. If you left click on it, it basically selects the pivot point for you. And then you can hold down left click and drag it. And so this is the quickest way to basically dictate where this object will rotate from or where the center of the object is. So I want to find a point on this image that I can keep matching my red oval to. Since this is more or less, I like this smaller curve here, it's a little bit easier to pay attention to it this way. But what I'll do is I'll hover over the end point of this pivot point to the edge of my red oval here. And as I'm holding down left click, you'll see the X and Y canvas coordinates for where exactly you are placing our pivot point on the current image. So I'll just take note of this, right? X is 197, Y is 208. So if I ever wanted to change the position of each one of the images after that, you can see it's now in our position here on our object parameters. It shows you the X is 190. What we can do is make this exact. We'll just do 197. Oops. 197 by 208. Right. So you won't notice it immediately on the image itself. But now our the center of our image, our first image, is right there at the very edge. So this is a common location that I can match all of my other images in my sequence to. So what I'll do is I'll go to my second image. I'll just click on the keyframe of where it starts, and this way I'm not really struggling to see that it is frame 2 because I know it's frame 2. So I'll just choose a time indicator that happens within the second image's sequence. Sorry, the time band itself. And I'll do the same process for each one of these images. So again, you'll have to do this 25 times, but if you want everything centered, this is a great habit to get into. Again, just click on your pivot point to select it. You'll see it turn gray if you're in design mode. If you're in animation mode, it'll turn yellow-orange. And now you can hold down left click and drag it again to that point. Let's just try this endpoint here. Right, so you'll notice that now that I'm at the very end of my oval, at the leftmost part of my oval, it says X is 195 and Y is 212. Of course, that is the current position because of the image itself, not because of the pivot point. But because we can now tell it to move to those X and Y coordinates, I can just go up here again to the second image's position parameters and type in 197 by, what was it, 208, I believe, 197, 208. And now as I scrub through, you'll see that my first image lines up almost exactly with my second image. Right, so this is the way that we're going to align all of the images as we get through it. So again, you'll see a slight displacement here on the third image. Not too much to worry about, but I'll just go through each one real quick. If you guys have any questions about what I'm doing here, I'm just trying to realign all of the images so that they're lined up with each other. So I drag my pivot point to the edge because this is a common area that shows up in each one of my image sequence pictures. And I'm just changing the current position of it exactly to 197 by 208, right? Because that is the point that we determined from our first image. So now our three images here, image 1, 2, and 3 are all lined up real nice, but you'll see by the second image, you'll see this little hop up happen. And that's outside of the canvas, so nobody's really going to be noticing it as you render this image sequence out. So let me do this for a few more. I'll just go through real quick and make these edits as we go. If you guys have any questions, please type them in the chat and I'll answer them as best I can. But as I'm going through here, I'm just going to go to each image and change its pivot point so that they're all lined up more or less. Right. So as you can see, there are some parts of animation that become a bit more tedious as you go through. This just happens to be a series of image sequence. An image series, an image sequence in series that is not lined up one image after the other. So I have to go in here and manually realign everything. Generally, when you export these from another program, it's a good idea to make sure that each one of the images is lined up. And I'll just scrub through to make sure it stays relatively in the same location. So you notice there's a little fewer, a little less jitter in our image sequence now that I'm scrubbing through it. But this is the process. I'm clicking on my pivot point, moving it to a known location of the image or a piece of the image that we know exists in all of the other images in the sequence. And then what I can do is type in the exact position that we want that common image location to line up with. And so doing pretty good here. You can see a couple of these are really, really far off. So we'll get a few more of these done, and we'll have a better idea of how this image sequence will play out. And what's great about all of these being in a combined layer is that we are changing the pivot point of each individual image within the combined layer. But what you can end up doing is selecting the combined layer itself. It's almost like a controller or a master layer that controls everything underneath it. So what we can do is if you need to realign or recenter that whole animation sequence, what you'd end up doing is going up to the combined layer itself and changing your registration point to the center. And that'll just make sure everything is in line with where you need it on the canvas at that time. Let's see how we're doing here. There we go. 12 jumps up a little bit. It's 197, 208. And guys, if you have any questions about animation looping or image sequences, please ask them in chat now, and I'll give you a little bit more information about what you're curious of. You know, this process is extremely tedious, but hopefully your viewers will be less motion sick from the image bouncing around a lot less. So this is a good common practice to get into if you run into an issue like this. And this, it's a good point to bring up that this image sequence is actual pictures, actual photographs. So if you have something that is handmade or hand-drawn in Photoshop digitally, generally you align all of that stuff automatically. So when you export that image sequence, they're going to be aligned for you. But because of this being a series of photographs, this is generally a common problem you'll run into, is that not always each image is kept in sequence and centered. So as we get to the end here, you'll see here that I've lost basically the red oval as the base of my image has disappeared. So it's going to be difficult for me to actually line this up. So a good habit to get into when you're looking at your image sequences is to just scrub through your timeline and just go back and forth from the first image to the last one. These last images seem to be okay. Here's our oval reappears. So the edge of our oval reappears here at, let's see, frame 22. So I can go back in and start to reposition these as best as I can to that exact 197 by 208 point. So it's good to have a common position on your image sequences as you're replacing these or recentering them rather. 208 and two more. Let's see if we can fly through these. 7 by 208. And then final 25th frame here, we can center this, and we should have a fairly decent series of or sequence of images here. So I'll hide my combine layer. I'll click on that little triangle again to hide all those individual layers. And now I'll just hit enter, and you can see all of my, well, more or less, all of these red ovals are centered. So it gives you less of a motion sickness reaction from your viewers. So just for this instance here, we had to do this process. So although tedious, it helped us out in seeing exactly what we're looking at and not being distracted by image jitter. So that's something you'll end up doing quite a bit with photographs. So let me scoot by this real quick. I already showed you how to scale our layers. But what I can do is I will hide our combine layer. Here, I'll just go to this impact sequence. And it's always a good habit to get into naming each one of your layers, each one of your assets as you bring them in. And this way, now that I have, let's get a decent shot here for how we'll save this to our project library. So a good habit to get into is naming your layers. I always find it a good process to group your layers. In this way, it hides all of the distracting keyframes from the sequence itself or from the scene itself. So you select your combine layer here and you hit F8 and it will group. Ooh, I got to unlock it first. Unlock your layer, hit F8, and it will put it into a group layer. You'll see all my keyframes disappeared, but I can still play through and see the image sequence inside of it. And then to get into the group layer to make any changes, you just click on this little thumbnail. You see a little pencil-like icon show up. If you hover over it, it says Edit Group, and you can click on it, and it will take you into that combined layer, or into that new group layer, and it will show you all of these laid out for you, how you had laid them out in the combined layer. So now that it's a group layer, I'll always make a habit of locking it so that you're not tampering with the image indirectly by clicking on the canvas anywhere and dragging. So this would displace it if you had animation mode on. But what I'm going to do is, after I had locked the layer, after I had repositioned all the center points, I'm going to click on my little library or market and project library icon down here. It's this little colorful building icon at the bottom of our toolbar. And at the top of this panel, of the marketplace panel, you'll see a switcher from market to project library. And I'll click on project library. And project library is essentially all the assets that we want to save to this project. So if we ever wanted to reuse impact sequence at any point in time, we can save it to our library and just click and drag it into our canvas or into our scene later. So what I'll do is I'll just get a nice little thumbnail image. I'll go to that point in time where, this is the thumbnail image I want to save for this sequence to happen. So I'll bring it to, let's say, 1 second. That looks pretty cool. And I'll go back over to my project library and click on the plus symbol. And what this does is it adds it to your project library. And from here, I can just click and drag. And you'll see if I hover over the thumbnail, it'll show me the name, impact sequence. Whatever we name the layer is what the project library layer or object is saved as. So I'll click and drag impact sequence back to my canvas. And now I can, make duplicates if I wanted to of them occurring at different times. And just from that, you'll get a relatively decent use out of creating looping animations that you can use over and over again, and just, save them to your project library and save them and then reuse them elsewhere. So I'll give you another example of our impact sequence here. Now that I have it in my project library, I can actually get rid of it from my layers panel. I just click on it, unlock it so I can delete it, and then hit this little trash can icon here and delete the layer, and boom, it's gone. But you see it stays in my project library. I can bring it back whenever I feel like having that object or animation there. So I'll get rid of that, and I'll show you how we can, we can do some timeline looping with one of our marketplace items or objects. I'll unhide it because I had it here hiding all this time in this group 1 layer. And you'll see here, I have this nice little setting with a few trees, and I have this beehive. And my beehive, when I hit enter, you'll see our bees do a little dance. They just jitter back and forth. So this is pretty cool. If I want something that's a bit more animated, and I want to be able to loop that animation over and over again, let's say it's flying around, each one of these bees is flying around the nest as opposed to just hovering in space. What I can do is unlock it first so that I can go into the group layer. I'll click on this little thumbnail image to the left of the group layer called Edit Group. And now I can see everything that makes up the group layer. So I have my background, which I want to lock. I want to make sure I'm not disturbing the position or anything attached to that group layer. And then I have beehive. So beehive, if I zoom in, you'll see the beehive consists of my 5 bees and the beehive itself. Again, if you click, because it's a group layer, if you click on the little image thumbnail to the left, you can isolate just the beehive and just the bees. So this is a great way to see how group layers inside of group layers function. And then finally, while I'm inside of my beehive layer, I can zoom into my timeline here, and you'll see the looping action occurring on my timeline of each one of these bees. So I have 5 bees that are just jittering back and forth. Again, if you've ever done any looping before, what happens is you can right-click on the end of the animation or the end of that loop, change end action, and you can force the animation to just stay put. So the last keyframe or last position of that object will stay on the timeline infinitely, again, until the scene duration is hit. Or you can stop it completely. So if I click on stop, you'll see this little icon at the end of my time band has changed to our stop symbol, whereas everything else was a reverse. If you hover over it, you'll see the icons, infinite, stop or stay, stop, reverse, and loop. So those 4 icons are a great way of seeing what the end action is actually doing for that object. If you select the time band and you'll see it highlighted, the border of your time band is highlighted in blue, you can usually tell where the beginning and the end of that particular object happens. And again, when you click and drag, you can see the exact time of the very beginning keyframe and the very ending keyframe of that object. So again, those are some nice little hints for you guys to look at as you're creating your animations. So again, as you want to create your looping animations, and I'll hide everything else except for the 1 bee. Right, so just a cute, simple little bee, and I'll scrub through to show you the motion. So it's literally just translating from one position to the next, but to make it look like it's going back and forth, instead of stopping it, you can just click on the end action itself and click on reverse. You'll see a number indicator to the right of reverse and loop. And if you click on those, you can tell it how many times to reverse. So if you go click on 2 and hit enter, it'll only reverse once, basically play through twice is what it's denoting there. And then it'll disappear at the end. Or I can click on it again, and let's say 3, hit enter, and now it's added a third reverse. But because it's reverse, it's essentially flipping the animation. It's basically doing this, right? So if you think of it playing from start to end and then end to start, but it'll play in sequence along the timeline. So it'll keep repeating that reversed or flipped timeline for you, time band. So because these are reversed animations, I'll just leave it that way. If you go to 0, it basically resets it to infinite. So it will infinitely reverse loop that bee animation time and time again. But what I actually want to do is have one of these bees fly around my object, not just float there. So in order to avoid disturbing any of the other objects here, again, it's a good habit to lock down any of these other shapes or objects that are on your scene by just clicking on this little lock button next to them. But I want to duplicate my B copy number 4. I'll just select my layer and click on duplicate layer. And you'll see it created a new copy on my layers panel, copy 5. So I'll lock and hide number 4 because I don't want to disturb that one. I don't want to accidentally move it. And I'm left only with seeing my beehive, which I can't click on because I locked it, and my bee. So I can click and drag this wherever I please. And this will essentially give me the power to animate only this object as I create my new loop. So because I don't want this final keyframe anymore, I'll click on the end action and just go to let's do stay, so I can show you how this works. So if stay is selected, the end action disappears because there is no end; it's infinite, and it will just keep this image on the timeline. You'll see the time band itself is gray, which means there's no tweening. There's no actual animation happening in the green part of our time band. So let's keep it to this 0.6 second mark. And then we'll just say, oh, I have to change it over to animation mode. So if we want to move an object and make sure it's keyframed, it's a great habit to make sure that you are in animation mode. The easiest way to tell is one, animation is selected up at the very top. The switch is highlighted in this orange-yellow color. And the main menu itself has changed color as well. So as long as it's orange, you will be keyframing anything as you move it. And you'll see here on my timeline, I'll move it to a point in time. So I can do this. So I'll just do this, little 3 keyframe rotation of the or loop of this B object. But if you see, I'll just click on my last and my first time keyframe, and you'll see they're in different positions. In any animated loop, you want it to be seamless. So you essentially want it to go back to the original position of that first keyframe. So because there's a difference, and you'll see here, it'll be difficult to see, but I'll show you the difference. If my last keyframe, let's say my last keyframe is here, you can see my motion path isn't completed. It starts relatively where my cursor is right here. It'll play through and then end here. So that if I was to right click on my last keyframe and changed my end action to loop, and then played through this, you can see there's a gap where my B doesn't exist from the first frame to the end. It basically just teleports to the beginning of the motion path. So one good habit to get into is clicking on that first keyframe. It's very difficult to see on my current timeline, but when you click on a keyframe, it's highlighted or bolded, or I should say outlined, with a little blue outline. This tells you that that keyframe, that particular keyframe is selected. With it selected, hold down the Alt key and drag it to the very end frame. And you'll see as I drag it, you can see the keyframe moving in my looped timeline. So this tells you that this object or this keyframe is actually moving across your timeline and being copied. So now that now that I've duplicated, essentially duplicated that first keyframe by holding down Alt and dragging it along my time band, the first and last keyframes are exactly in the same position. So now when I play through my animation, it will play endlessly, and my B is now fully animated and fully loopable, or looping seamlessly, which is the term of the perception of the animation just continuing, like there is no cutoff point, there's no unintended teleportation or change in rate of speed. So seamless animation is what we're going for with our looping timeline. So now that I have it looping, what I can do is quickly click on my motion path of the B, and one of the powers we have over this over our motion paths is that we can add the little nuances of the curvature of our motion path without actually adding more keyframes or disturbing the keyframes along the timeline. So if you wanted to, let me hide the beehive here. If this is just a slight bug that we're working on at the moment, if you have objects underneath the motion path, it's looking to select the object underneath it, but because the beehive is locked, we can't actually do anything. And you'll see this little white circle. And this is essentially where we could add nodes to our motion path. They don't exist. So that will fix after a time. But just to show you how this works, my motion path here, if I hover over it with my direct selection tool and hold down left click and drag, I can now round out each one of these motion path curves. If I added, you see I added a node here, and it's designated by these Bezier handles. If I added a node, I didn't intend to add a node, you can double click on a node, and this works exactly the same way as the pen tool. So what I can do is click and drag those points in time. And go back up here at the top and reset my last keyframe. There we go. And if you have to, just use the Bezier handles to, to better refine the curve that's taking place. If you want to, you can hold down Control, and as you're dragging the Bezier handle, it will uniformly scale the shape. So I can get a relatively rounded animation curve going, or motion path going for this bee. So I'll just make kind of this egg shape. And then because my object is already looped, it's going to play around this object, or around this motion path as I've edited it. And you'll see if I go to each one of my keyframes, it has added that node on the motion path for me to fix on the canvas itself with the direct selection tool. So I didn't realize I was going over time here. It's about 15 minutes in. Okay, so I'll unhide everything. I have the looping animation occurring on my bee. Now I want to make sure I lock it. Again, good habit to get into, locking anything that you're not currently planning on relocating or keyframing. So when you click and drag, it's not disturbed. But now I have one bee who will go around the hive, and the other bees will just hover in place. Okay, so this is a spastic bee. And again, if you ever want to change the rate of speed that this is occurring at, select the object or select the layer itself on the time band. Because there is an end action, you can hold down Shift and left click. Oops, sorry about that. I might be zoomed in too far. I'll change this to stop and see if that works. There we go. As long as you can hold down Shift and select that end handle, you can scale the rate of speed at which this happens. So my bee was going around the hive relatively quick. So what I'll do is I'll just hold down Shift on this blue end handle and rescale the animation speed. So let's change this to, let's say, 3 seconds. 3 seconds. Come on. Where are you? There you go. And just be careful with your rescaling. When you rescale the time, any edits that you've made on the motion path, you'll see when I click on the bee, the motion path tends to misunderstand how to calculate these curves. So make sure you go back to your motion path after you've rescaled this looping animation, and make sure everything's in place as you wanted it. I'll just, oops. So I'll just fix some of these Bezier handles so they work better to keep our animation a bit more fluid. And then I'll change my end action to loop. I'll click on this little tag at the end and click on loop. So now I have a 3-second looping animation while all the other bees are looping over 1 second, over 0.6 seconds rather. So he's now going in a slower motion. So we'll just say that's the queen bee. So after we've set up our looping animation, we'll lock it down. And the way to get back to the top level, I'll unhide my beehive too. The way to get back to the top level of our animation, because again, we're inside of a group layer. The best thing that you can do is look at your breadcrumbs. We call these breadcrumbs, leaving a trail for you to find your way home, essentially. You can click through each one of these group layers or the name tags of each one of the group layers. So I can go directly back to group 1, which is the entire beehive and the bees and the background itself. Or I can click on scene 1, which is just the group layer with everything inside of that layer. So now you see I have a cute little scene that I can hit. I can press enter. Oh, let me change the scene duration on this guy to 6 seconds. And now we can play through for 6 seconds. And you'll see the scene duration flag at the end. Hit enter, make sure everything's playing smoothly. You know, if you wanted to doctor this up a little bit, of course, you could add some audio, some bee noises, some birds chirping. But the point of that is now that we have the loop is occurring with our bee going around the hive, and it ends at 6 seconds, we could have an HTML5 video published so that it continues to loop and you will never see these bees stop at any point. So this is the part where I show you animation looping. So what I showed you is looping animation or timeline looping, the looping of the actual objects animating on the canvas. Animation looping is essentially telling it, so if you go up here to the top right, we have our published settings. Animation looping is looping the animation endlessly on the player level or on the level of the viewer that you're seeing it in. So under our publish options or our publish settings here, we want to make sure that HTML5 is selected. I believe, let's see, this GIF also has a looping option, which will automatically loop the GIF for you. In most cases, you know, Giphy or any of those fun little animated sequences, you can loop these just by checking on this loop box. But we want to do, oops, my bad. But what we want to do is make this an HTML5 video or HTML5 format, which will play across all devices. So it's really good habit for you guys to get into using HTML5 now as opposed to Flash. And I will check on loop and hit HTML5 and wait for this guy to render. And there we go. After it's rendered, it'll give you it'll give you a URL. Excuse me. It'll give you a web URL link that you can share with anybody. And we host this from our server. If you wanted to embed the HTML5 video into your own website, you can actually select this iframe little snippet of code down here at the bottom and copy that and paste that directly into your own website. But if you just want to share this on your social media outlets, you know, your Facebook, your Twitter, you can just select the clip and paste that into a new tab on your web browser. Copy it first. Control-C to copy, Control-V, and it'll open a viewer for you to see our little animation happening. Now, because of the size of the canvas, you'll see it's pretty small, but you'll see as it plays through here, I'll show you the timeline. The bee that we just made a looping animation with is going to continue to play through over and over and over again. So this is our animation looping. And that's as simple as it gets, really, for looping animations in general. You want to make sure that each one of these animated loop completes fully. So if you remember our bee itself, our bee that is circling the hive lasts for 3 seconds. So I went back into our group layer to show you. So the entire loop lasts from frame 0 seconds to 3 seconds. So as long as you can get the scene duration, you'll see that up in our scenes panel, to a to an integer of whenever that repeats. So 3 seconds, 6 seconds, 9 seconds. You can have that final animation loop play seamlessly also. So that's a good pointer to look at when you are looping your animation so that nothing kind of jumps around on you. And that pretty much wraps up everything I have to show you about looping animations. It's not as complicated as it might seem, but just make sure that you're that you're setting your image sequences correctly as you bring them in. Again, that was with our little impact sequence here. Right, so make sure that you you have your impact sequence centered, or sorry, your image sequence centered, and that all of the images happen within a certain period of time. And again, you can scale them from the combine layer. And then, as a force of habit, just when you know you have a finished animation sequence, I like to group it or keep it as a group layer. That way, you're not seeing any of the immediate keyframes, and it's basically a contained animation itself. Name your layer, add it to your project library so you have it to copy and use over and over again. So that's what your image sequence is. And then also your looping timeline animations like RB that occur at every 3 seconds is for one, that the timeline itself is looping. And again, when you publish or go to publish, you can click on the little gear icon, make sure it's the right file format. So either GIF or HTML5 can loop. HTML5, you can have auto start. It will start right away without you having to click play. And then just click on the little HTML5 button. You get your web URL for the HTML5 clip itself, and then you have the embedded code here, an iframe code that you can just put into your own website if you wanted to do it that way. Otherwise, if you guys are web developing and you don't want to have to deal with iframes, what you'd have to do is make sure you have you signed up for a pro subscription. And then what you can do is go to projects from our main menu and go down to download HTML5 code. And this essentially gives you everything that you've created here on our canvas, everything from the timeline, all of the objects, all of the shapes and animations as they appear. And then you can embed those directly or source those directly from your own server for your website. So that's for you techie guys out there, for you web heads. And that about wraps it up. So to finish up for you guys here, if you have any questions, I just ask that you type those into chat. This is our live Q&A session. So if you have anything off topic that doesn't have to relate to our animation looping in any way whatsoever, you can go ahead and ask those right now, and I'll get to you individually. But before we do so, I'd just like to tell you, if you have any desired topics on your mind, something that you'd like to cover, that you'd like me to cover next week for next Wednesday's live weekly Animatron webinar, you can go to feedback@animatron.com, create an email, send it to us at feedback@animatron.com, and make sure that your email subject mentions the webinar or mentions webinar in some way. Hey, Bryce, I'd like to suggest a topic for webinar. And just make sure the description or the body of your email tells me exactly what you're looking to accomplish. And we'll try to develop a topic or cover a topic for a number of you guys. For whatever you're working on your own projects, it's a little bit easier to custom tailor it to your needs. So I'll choose a topic for next week based off of all that feedback from you. Again, if you have any questions or comments or suggestions, please just send those right into feedback@animatron.com. Before I step away from this, I'd like to ask you guys to please please follow and like us on Facebook and Twitter, and check out our blog on the Animatron page. So just go to animatron.com. You can find our forum, very helpful. A lot of people ask questions here. This is our community for you guys to answer questions that other people have, or ask questions, and hopefully one of us here on the staff will answer those for you. If you are looking for more insider information about what's going on, what's happening down the pipeline, you can click on our blog, have a read through our blog, and you'll see some fun little articles that we've developed for you guys. Oop. Sorry, I got some audio playing on that one. So go check out our blog, check out our forum. Make sure that you create your free Animatron account with us, and just start playing around with our Animatron editor. It's really fun to get into, learn the tools. Go to our YouTube playlist for our official tutorials, and to give you the best understanding of what you can do and how to function inside the editor. And again, tell your friends, tell everybody you know. Animatron is the next wave of online web animation software for you guys, for everybody to use. So thanks for sticking with me for this past hour, and wish you guys a good week, good weekend, and I hope to see you again next week. Again, Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern time, and we'll have a new topic for you then. Thank you very much, guys. Again, I'm Bryce, your Animatron Guru. Have a good day.